Well, thank you for joining us in this panel today. I have the pleasure to be your moderator. The title is about integrating legacy and old systems and new technologies, specifically AI in parliaments. As many of you may know, my name is Luís. I'm the executive director of Bússola Tech. We are a global think tank that promotes discussions and research about parliamentary modernization. I have the pleasure to welcome our dear friend Esteban Sanches from the Cámara de Diputados of Chile, Jonathan Ruckert from NovaWorks Australia, and Ludovic Delepiné from the EU Parliament. Before we begin, I'd like to yield the floor to each one of you for you to introduce yourself. This is not a presentation yet, it's just for you to introduce yourself in 1 minute, telling about your role and how you're connected to this particular topic. If you allow me, I'd like to do this alphabetically, starting with you, Esteban. Would you like to introduce yourself to the colleagues?
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Luis. I'm Esteban Sanches. I'm a head of IT system development in Chamber of Deputy of Chile. I work in the Parliament 20 years right for now, and I'm very glad to share our experience about this interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esteban. Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself to the colleagues as well?
Yeah, thanks, Louis. My name's Jonathan from NovaWorks here in Australia. We basically specialise in working with parliaments around the digitalisation, adoption of AI, range of different other services along those lines. And we also have developed a software as a service solution for parliaments to help them with their onboarding experience.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Ludovic, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Hi, dear colleagues. My name is Ludovic Delepiné. I'm the head of IT governance and enterprise architecture unit for the European Parliament. And I will briefly illustrate this domain by some legacy systems that we had and their interpenetration with the new AI and all the problematics that we had by managing various layers of technologies depending on the age of these technologies.
Thank you so much, Ludovic. Just to explain to the colleagues, we have divided this panel today in a few sections. First, I will yield the floor to each one of our esteemed guests for the time of 10 minutes for them to present what they are working on currently and their view on how to integrate new technologies with legacy systems, with old parliamentary systems. And after all of the presentations are concluded, I have prepared a few questions. And of course, if colleagues wish to ask any questions yourself, please feel free to add here on the chat, and I'll do my best to integrate these questions in our conversation. Feel absolutely free to do that. I'll do this alphabetically again. Esteban, would you like to begin with your presentation?
Yes, of course. I want to share my screen. Do you see it?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you.
Yes.
So my presentation is about just a review of some key point of modernization and integrating legacy system and new technologies, viewing on the point of view of the Chamber of Deputy of Chile. So around the world, parliaments are under increasing pressure to modernize their process, as well the Chamber's deputy. This means we are adopting digital tools to improve efficiency, enhance transparency, and better engage with citizens. But we have a problem. This new technology need to work with the existing system that already run, many of which are old, fragile, and deeply embedded in parliamentary workflow. Balancing modernization with continuity is not just a technical issue for us, it's a strategic one. But why? Because a well-integrated digital environment for us enables better legislative processes, smart data use, and more open communication between Parliament and the people they serve. To start, I would like to talk just a little about what we mean by legacy system. For us, a legacy system are older IT system that could be software and hardware that is still in use. In our case, this system they perform as an essential function that are very difficult or risky to replace. They tend to often be updated technologically. They don't communicate very well with another new platform, and the cost to maintain or do some upgrade is very high to maintain over time. Well, the risks are very evident and significant because there are a lot of security vulnerability due to outdated technologies and framework that their system runs, and there is a lot of data silos that prevent efficient information sharing. So, despite this problem, the Chamber of Deputies this day continue relying on legacy system because they are familiar for us, deeply integrated, and often mission critical. For example, here one of the oldest system is used to manage all the information, the documents using the committee debate. This that system was implemented 15 years ago, and today is extremely difficult to maintain. When it was launched, the main purpose of that system was make more transparent the committee work, but this day that system is a critical key on the all the committee debate. In the other side, uh, we have a growing set of new technology that are changing how the chamber works. For one side, one one of the sample is the cloud computing, which allows us to enable scalable and secure storage and external service that would be otherwise impossible to get it for us. Also, there is the trending technology that is artificial intelligence that we use to research, document analysis, and even assistant to in legislative drafting. Other technologies better known, like e-parliament platform, supporting remote session, digital work voting, and collaborative editing bills, and open data portals, which promote transparency and allow the citizens and researchers to engage with the legislative data. That two last technology are better known, but is still not present in all parliament in the world. The benefits of this technology are very clear. Is easier and faster access to information, streamlined processes, and improve decision making for the parliament. But again, all of this technology will not succeed alone. They must connect with the system that already run in the parliament processes. So how we are dealing to integrate the legacy system and the new technology here in the Chamber's deputy. For us, the key is integrate rather than abruptly replace a system. Here are four main strategies that Chamber are follow. First, phase integration. That's mean we gradually replace the legacy system or module or component of their system over time, rather than doing all at once. For example, we start to change the user interface first while leaving the backend untouched. Other strategic is use hybrid solution, and we combine on-premise legacy system infrastructure with modern cloud services. For example, we store sensitive data locally while offering remote access through a secure cloud portal, external portal. And other key point or strategic is have a good software layer separation, which allow to communicate with modern application interface to extract and use data from old system and securely and efficient. That means using external or internal API or middleware. And the last key strategy is have a good strategy to data migration and cleaning, because over time, legacy systems accumulate a large volume of data, like legislative text, voting record, committee report, even a scanned document or multimedia. But this old data is often inconsistent, purely structured, duplicate, or stored in an outdated format. If we simply move all the data into new system without cleaning, we risk importing the same problem, so making the new system unreliable or unusable. Um, all these strategies help to chamber to involve step by step without risking system failure or overwhelming our staff. Of course, integration doesn't come without challenges. First, we have a great challenge that all the parliament, I think, have the budget constraint, because upgrading system and hiring consultant and developer can be expensive, especially for a smaller parliament like us. There is also a resistance to change, a very human factor, because the staff and member of parliament may be reluctant to adopt new tools, especially when if the system tools still works. Also, there is a lot of security and compliance concerns, because migrating data introduced risk of breach of data loss if not handled correctly. Introduce all new technology is very important to concern about the security and compliances. Finally, there's a lot of skill gaps, because many parliament lack in the house expertise needed to plan or manage digital integration. That's why capacity building, both technical and organizational, is a core part of any modernization strategy. So, um, in conclusion, sorry, I would like to mention a new challenge that has come with the use of new AI technology as compared with the traditional system. Because in traditional IT system like a voting record database or document and management system, the technology is very deterministic. Not is very data is deterministic. This means the output is always the same for the same input. For example, if you search for a bill number, you always get the exact same result, because the rules and logic are predefined. In contrast, systems using an artificial intelligence are probabilistic. Instead of fixed rule, they make decision based on data patterns. For instance, an AI assistant help you draft legislative summary might give you different suggestion every time, depending how it's interpreting the context. The key difference is that the traditional system offer predictability and control, while AI-based system offer flexibility, but with outcome can may vary and require human oversight. Today, the Chamber of Deputy users are very familiar with the traditional system and deterministic system, and sometimes they don't understand why an AI system give them different results. So therefore, it's very necessary to educate the user to explain how the AI works, technology works. So in conclusion, integrating legacy system with new technology is not just a technical upgrade, it's a strategic long-term transformation. A few best practice that we are follow. Start with digital audit, understand what system we have, what they do, and how they interact, not just the system, so also the data, which data we have, and what is the quality of that data. Also, it's necessary engage all the stakeholders, not just the IT staff, also the parliamentarians and all the others as administrative department and staff. And most important, invest in training and change management, because in the end, system don't transform parliament, and people do the transformation. So that's the, thank you very much. That's the most key point that Chamber want to share for you.
Thank you very much, Esteban, for the very comprehensive and very interesting presentation. I took a few notes here for us to continue this discussion during the panel. I'd like to invite you, Jonathan, to make your presentation now. Would you like to share your screen, or
No, actually, I'm going to be talking a lot about our experiences, and I think if I was to do a presentation, it would be exactly the same as what has just been shown as well. So it's definitely very insightful, and you know, it's definitely in line with a lot of what we actually do here at NovaWorks as well. I think, you know, from our point of view, digital transformation in Parliament isn't necessarily about replacing everything. You know, it's really about creating that bridge, really the intelligent bridge between those two divides, in terms of obviously understanding that there is significant legacy sort of development and systems, because parliaments have been around for a long, long time. But then it's also understanding the challenges faced, in terms of, well, you know, what are the actual key challenges? What are the integration approaches? And really, and what are the lessons learned around this sort of process as well? And, you know, I think sometimes what we've also sort of realized as well is that the longer the parliament has been around, is the more challenging a full transformation can actually occur. We've worked with some, what I call some very modern parliaments, you know, and like in the big scheme of things, they may have been around for, say, 25 years, which in parliamentary terms is not very long. But the way which they're thinking and the way which they can adapt and innovate is very different to, say, some of the parliaments that we've spoken with, you know, who have been around for 100 or 150 years, as an example. So there's actually working out what the strategy is really to really, I think, get the true value in terms of what that sort of integration looks like from a legacy system point of view in the parliamentary operations space as well. And I like to sort of reiterate a couple of points that Stephen was saying as well. You know, traditionally, and if we look at the traditional sort of parliamentary model, there's a lot of different data silos, and people buy off-the-shelf products, or they'll develop an in-house product, you know, with their own sort of engineers and developers, etc., for this particular problem. And then they'll go off and they would have built something else for something else. And, you know, if they've got multiple chambers, then, you know, one house might be doing something and the other house might be doing something else. And it's really then just creating all these sort of mini legacy systems, and it just compounds. And, you know, as sort of Stephen was sort of saying as well, was that you're also introducing your technical debt, and your, you know, the issue is then you're increasing the potential problems around that sort of digitization process, in terms of moving to more sort of like what I call cloud native processes, or those sort of other things as well. And, you know, it's understanding really, you know, what do we want to achieve with those sort of processes, because, you know, IT is there to support the business, if that makes sense. So it really has to, in some respects, be understood and led from the business perspective to want to actually have that change. So IT has obviously got its own drivers in terms of the technical debt, the maintenance, the non-ability to innovate from a technical perspective, as an example. But it's finding that true balance, really, you know, from the resistance to change, as an example, you know, security and compliance, as an example, as the budgetary constraints, you know, how can we actually make it more effective? You know, and we even find this sort of in the commercial world as well, is that, you know, do we really need a team of 20 people or 40 people or 100 people to develop a really constructive solution these days? And I think the answer nowadays is a lot more sort of, you know, is, you know, using the tools to actually, even using AI tools to help you with your process as well. So it's not just about the technical outcome or the technical understanding or the delivery of software or the integration, but it can actually help you formulate a lot of ideas. And again, you know, you could actually use AI tools to supplement, you know, the work which you're actually been doing from a integration perspective or adoption of AI as well. And I think that in its own right can actually quite, you know, furtherly reduce the cost in terms of some of this implementation as well. I was reading an article the other day where they were saying, you know, the cost of, say, now deploying an AI agent for development purposes for one person could potentially replicate 5 developers like outputs, as an example, if it's done right. So it's really quite interesting when you're looking at the cost perspective. There are a lot of different tool sets out there which can actually help really bootstrap that experience in terms of, you know, the actual digital innovation side of things as well. So there's a lot of things which we can actually then start to explore, which I think had been cost prohibitive, you know, previously, or you have to then hire, you know, a very big company to do a lot of analysis and a range of other things, where a lot of it is actually there, if we can know how to extract it, as an example. One of the biggest things, though, is like we have this sort of concept around, you know, the resistance to change with long-term employees, but actually they're the real people to be talking to, because they have the context. And any time that we're actually working with AI or working with this sort of digital divide as well, context of the whole solution and context of Parliament and context of those sort of procedures really is really super important. You know, we can't put in new systems with AI without the context. And so leveraging your existing staff, leveraging those sort of knowledge bases within your organization is actually really quite critical. So it's sort of shifting, I think, from the paradigm of when we look at stuff and saying, well, actually, you know, well, AI is going to affect my job, etc. It's really about, I think, rethinking how they're sort of, you know, presenting in that work sort of perspective as well. If we look at a software developer, I was like watching a lot of YouTube recently and around these sort of, you know, trends and whatnot. It's actually moving from actually creating code to reviewing code. And, you know, it's actually about saying, well, actually, how can we create things, but actually then have to review it now? So it's really that sort of paradigm shift is really important when we're actually then looking at that sort of digital innovation space as well. So I think what we've seen work in the past is start with low risk but high value applications when we're looking at that sort of legacy integration. And I think having a layer on top which is more modern but can talk to both, you know, the upstream, say, cloud services or AI services, but also talk to the downstream services. So set yourself up with that sort of foundational piece. You know, from an architectural perspective, that becomes really important when we're actually looking at those sort of legacy systems, moving those into the new world, as an example. You know, intelligence search and a range of other things. effort and time and money into what they call model content. Developing that in a way where
Jonathan,
you could actually.
can you? We lost you for some 5 seconds.
Sorry.
Can you
Yeah.
come back some?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry. So we've been investing a lot of time and effort into what we call a model context protocol servers, or MCP servers, and that can actually be a bridge into using that with, say, Claude or ChatGPT into your own data sets is a really interesting example. But you're maintaining control over what it can actually then access, consume, and a range of other things as well, which is really quite exciting. So there's been a lot of, I think, there's a lot of innovation, a lot of thought in terms of how these sort of tooling sets can be actually then really integrated into your on-premise or your other sort of cloud systems as well. So, I think from a technical point of view, creating those sort of API layers, having a standard data sort of process, cleaning process as well around data is really important. A cloud hybrid approach, maintaining those sort of on-premise critical systems. We've seen a lot of things where, when you got, say, for example, you want to deal with your members of parliament and the data around members of parliament. Now, we can't necessarily just replace that system, as an example, straight off the bat, because everything else is going to be talking to that. So that might be table papers, that might be bills, that might be a range of other things. So it isn't just, you can't just do a big bang. You need to really think about, well, how can we then leverage all these sort of technologies, or how can we leverage all these layers in a meaningful way as well? And of course, I think a security first design is really important when we're looking at these sort of migrations and these sort of hybrid approaches as well. So, in terms of this, I think the adoption process, maintaining human oversight and verification is really important. The governance side is still really important. Understanding what all of these sort of new things actually mean from a parliamentary perspective is really important as well. So the transparency, in AI decision making and the human oversight side of things, because AI does make mistakes. So you can't just trust it to do everything and, everything's going to be fine. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the need for humans, as an example. But I think it's also, respecting the parliamentary process, the parliamentary procedures in this whole transition as well, does become really important, because, when you have certain people doing things in certain ways for, 10 years or plus, it becomes really hard for the driver for change sometimes, is because, well, if the old system works how they want it to for the last 10 years and they're comfortable with it, what is the actual driver for the change? Because they're still functioning as they are and they're still happy and they're still getting the work done. So it's really about, I think, the discovery of the driver for the change will help with that sort of process as well. Lessons learned, involve the staff early on in the process. That's really critical. It isn't an IT project, it's a business project with IT support, as an example. Yes, IT can lead it, but unless you've got the business buy-in, it's not going to go anywhere. That's really big. Running the parallel systems, during the transition periods and those sort of other things, and that hybrid approach in terms of how we can move data from a legacy system into a new system and vice versa as well. So it's always thinking about, like, it's a two-way street with a lot of this work as well. And I think clear communication of what does these sort of new innovations really drive for the business, but also I think understanding what the limitations are. So, as soon as you give somebody just a free text box, as a chat prompt and say, okay, just type whatever you feel like in there, everyone's going to have a very different experience. So we need to understand what the limitations are, because some people's expectations will be very different to others as well. So I think those are really, I think, my key points. Starting off with the key pilot projects, demonstrate clear value, understanding the change management aspects as well. And I think creating a technical layer, which is really bridging that gap between the legacy systems and the new systems becomes really quite critical moving forward.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing your thoughts on this. It's been a very insightful comments and presentation. And as I mentioned to Esteban, I have prepared a few questions. You touched on some of them already, which gives me the leave to deep dive on these topics. I'd like to finally invite Ludovic to share his views as well. I know this is a topic that is very close to heart for him. Ludovic, please feel free to use the floor and to make your presentation.
Thank you very much, Luís. Well, in fact, I almost agree with what was said before by Jonathan, and even
Ludovic, just one thing. Are you going to share your screen with the presentation you sent, or do you prefer that I do? Or...
You want, you can, yeah, you can do it. By the way, it's one slide, so that should be that should be easy for this case. But yeah, I agree with what Jonathan mentioned, and I agree with what Esteban mentioned before. So I took an angle which is a little bit different compared to the two previous introductions, and I wanted to illustrate it with a real case. So something that we have in life, and I apologize, maybe it will contain some technological elements, but it will also help to better understand how we are addressing this on a specific context in our case. So the one that I would like to illustrate is related to the injection of data within a solution to disseminate public archive, which is called Archibot. So it was already mentioned and illustrated several times before, and from which these data were coming from and how they arrived to the system in the end, because it's a long path. We all know that artificial intelligence is fueled by data. It was mentioned very clearly before by Jonathan. But if you do not know where your data are coming from, you may have serious issues while propagating them from within your organization to the last step. So I would just like to illustrate it with the integration of the case of the European Parliament archives. And this case is integration for this view, it's a broader one, but for this view with three information systems. One is called KM, that we call Knowledge Management. And this is an information system which contains metadata and document. And it's an aggregator for public legislative files, mainly from 2004 until 2014. And if we want to disseminate these legislative files for another period after 2014, then we have to reach to another solution, which is called Open Data Portal. It's another one, same level as KM, but I will just illustrate it with one chain, knowing that there would be several components. This is not the only one. So we have this knowledge management system, and this one aggregates information from several internal information systems which are related to business line. So you may have the production of agendas for the plenary, for instance. You may have the verbatim. You may have the contrary in extenso that we have in the parliament. You may have the list of votes. You may have a list des orateurs, so the ordering of the person taking the floor. So you may have a set of information systems that will be dedicated to one business line. And at one moment, because all these documents will be public altogether, you have an aggregator, and the knowledge management system is an aggregator of all information systems coming and delivering to these ones. And then there I will just illustrate with two legislatures, that was 2004, 2009, and 2009, 2014, because while this generation evolved, it was also clearly mentioned before, well, we changed the information system, and Open Data Portal came after 2014, exposing data a little bit differently. We have Clavis, and Clavis is a single archive management system. So it stores all metadata, all digital copies and original digital files since 1952 that we have to store in a permanent way within the European Parliament, and this is by regulation. And then we have another solution, which is Archibot, and Archibot is an advanced search platform to search for European Parliament's archive through signed digital archives since 1952. So there you just have these three systems, and I would like to illustrate the interoperability between all different systems, KM, Clavis, and Archibot. Archibald being at the end, the one dealing with artificial intelligence. And we have to implement tailored data exchange mechanism based on the specific needs and the format of each of the systems. So the first one is between knowledge management and Clavis. And therefore, connecting both, we follow a two-step process. The first step is retrieving the metadata, and that's very often the case. Sometimes you will have metadata that you will use. Sometimes this metadata will be used in addition of documents. You will not have all of them described in one single structure. So in this case, we need to have both. And we start initially by collecting this metadata from knowledge management in a structured format, especially in a JSON format. So JSON is a lightweight data interchange format. The metadata exported includes essential details about each document, such as the title, dates, various identifiers, codes, and as well as links to the actual document files. And these document files may have been on a various format. We had some PDF, RTF for the oldest ones, and XML for the most recent ones. So we have also the issue of the structuring of the document and the format of the document themselves. And these JSON files are exchanged through a REST API. So a REST API is it's a set of rules and constraints that define how data should be exchanged between a client on one side and a server on the other side. And of course, we need to ingest these data inside the archive management system. But these are two different technologies, two different legacy systems, and we need to morph them. So we need to transform this one. So when the transformation appears, we have this metadata in a standardized archival format, which is called EAD. So it's an encoded archival description, which is widely used in libraries and archives for describing collections. And this EAD XML file is sent to the system Clavis using a SOAP service, which is a common method for exchanging structured data between systems over the internet. And we also transform the format received in a PDF-A to ensure long-term preservation format for all the files. So PDF-A is a specialized version for the PDF format designed for long-term digital archiving. So you really see that at this level, we have a collection of information systems that are all dealing with the same thing. The purpose is on one side to aggregate them. We have specific formats, specific technologies. We need to exchange them. API, REST API on one side, which is quite recent generation, SOAP web services, and older generation on the other side, and exchange of information through following different formats. Within KM, this is self-structured data. In Clavis, it follows a standard, which is EAD XML. So then we need also to feed after Archibald, because we want to disseminate this information, make them accessible, but that's another system. And as we want to expose them, we've taken a different approach. In this case, while it's a one-shot for big sets of documents, we start by extracting the metadata directly from Clavis database and compiling them in a CSV file, which is a simple spreadsheet-like format. So yeah, we can still exchange data in CSV file. You do not have always to use other technologies for this kind of things, especially when this is a one-shot and it doesn't happen very often, and you have a limited set of data that fit with the size of a spreadsheet in number of information it can contain. So this file includes metadata we need, such as document identifiers, description, again, references, very similar to the first one, as well as the link to the PDF document. And you've seen that as we have transformed various format into PDF-A, now we are doing another step that is a digital signing of the document to ensure that this is a certified copy and you can compare to the original that you have stored within premises. And the next use a database application to read the CSV file, upload all of them into Archibald storage space, which is hosted on the cloud, because in this case, Archibald is a system which is used by citizens and exposed outside of the organization. All the other systems remain in premises and inside the organization. So when the reference files are uploaded, as I mentioned before, they are signed to ensure their integrity. And finally, we use a query engine within Archibald to explore and analyze the content that's now available from this cloud-based storage. So to summarize, As you see, this integration that in the end will arrive into an AI agent. We have a lot of steps, a lot of metadata. We change them. So between KM Clavis, we use JSON through REST API, and we have EAD XML to be injected via SOAP web services, so different technologies. And between Clavis and Archibot, we still use CSV files because sometimes as simple it could work because it's a file upload into the cloud-based storage solution with a small query engine before. So each integration is designed to reflect the technical nature of the system that is involved, each generation, because they were built on different generations, but also ensuring that data flows reliably and remain structured and accessible through all the process.
Thank you very much, Ludovic, for your presentation. And just to mention something that I believe it's correct, last month you were not even in the panel, but Archibot was mentioned and praised as a very good example by our good friend Jonathan here. And he doesn't know I'm saying that, so much appreciated for your presentation. It's in fact a tremendous job that you're doing on Archibot, before as the head of archives, now as the head of ICT. Well, allow me to start with a couple of questions. I saw a few colleagues send questions here. I will choose a few of them for the end of our panel. But my first question, I'll start with you, Esteban. I want to touch on data interoperability between legacy systems, specifically parliamentary legacy systems that are dealing with the parliamentary activity, the core business. And well, the newly implemented AI solutions, such as in your case with Cámara. What specific standards did the Chamber adopt to facilitate this data integration? And what would be the lessons you could share with colleagues from other parliaments watching us here today?
Well, Luis, I don't know if you follow some specific standard, but we in the Chamber Deputy, all the IT development system follow the rule that in the software engineering rule that said that we have to make a system very modular and a very separate layer of software. So there is no monolithic system. When we develop a system, we develop with a different layer, front end, middleware, and backend. So in this scenario, it's more easy to replace integrate with AI technology. For instance, we have a legacy system that use internal API, but when we try to integrate with the AI system, use another API, not just internal, external API provided for AWS or OpenAI services. So if you develop an IT system, you have to deal with that, deal with very structured and separate layer of software. There's a paradigm of developing software.
Thank you so much, Esteban, for your comments. Jonathan, would you like to comment on this same question?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of data interoperability in terms of standards as well. Like when I say, like, I think standards, I look at it in terms of how easy is for data to read. And that's one of the biggest things. So if we look at even archives or other things along those lines, we need something which is in a format that is effectively compatible with long-term archiving. Effectively, that's the way I sort of view it. So, you know, if we've got this sort of proprietary I don't know, like format out there, which is, you know, locked down to the nth degree, that's not a good option. But if we look at XML, if we look at PDFA, if we look at what I call the long-term archival sort of standards, we start to feel like there's a very much a push around, you know, plain text or structured text as an example. So PDFA will, is been around for quite a while, and that's recognised as very much a long-term archival sort of record. But when we're sort of looking at data interoperability and implementation of AI systems, there are a lot of different options available now. We've been sort of using, there's an open source bit of software out there called N8N, which can help develop AI agents and a range of other really interesting things, by having different interconnectors and a range of other things as well. So sometimes, to connect to a legacy bit of data, it might be a Access database, which is sitting on-prem. It might be a file share, as an example. Like, there are so many different legacy data points, but I think the key thing, though, is that there needs to be, sort of Ludovic sort of presented as well, it's that sort of, understanding where your data sets are. You may have to morph it into a different format or a different malleable format, supplement it with additional metadata for it to actually be truly useful. So for me, I look at it and go, well, from an integration point of view, it's really about understanding what the data points are. It's understanding, what we can actually then do to make it into what I call a supported format. And yeah, sometimes that can be quite difficult from a technology perspective as well. But what we're finding, though, is that there's obviously a lot of drive and momentum, especially in, say, the open source community or, the actual like parliamentary community. And people have probably developed some sort of form of connector out there to connect to certain things. So I think knowing where to look, like GitHub, or looking at, sort of these other places which are really, I think, starting to really innovate, to say, well, actually, yeah, maybe if I just did a small tweak over here, maybe I could actually get a lot more value out of it from that point of view as well. So like, our sort of learnings has really been about understanding what the data sets do look like. We went through a sort of a very much a similar process just recently and said, like, okay, and sometimes you've got to look at it the other way around too, like in terms of like not necessarily saying, well, actually I've got 20,000 data points. They're saying, like, actually, what do you want to get out of it? So understanding the source is obviously still really important, but it's understanding, well, what are we trying to achieve with our data as well? So mapping out that full end-to-end journey can help drive what types of data, the interoperability, how we can connect, etc. Because sometimes we might look at a legacy system and go, well, actually, only 3 bits of data points for that legacy system are truly valuable for the wider piece of work, instead of another 100 which are just internal, don't, for metrics or whatnot. It may not actually add really true value to that output in terms of what we're actually trying to achieve. So I think understanding your complete data landscape does become really important before we look at what those sort of data standards are.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for the very comprehensive response. Ludovic, would you like to share your thoughts on the same question?
Yeah, I'd like to say that when you are involved in data management and document management, you spend your time morphing data. That's the main job, because none of them have the same structure, none of them have the same format, and even when you're talking about XML, you will very rapidly discover that you have several instances of XML, and even if you are using Parliamentary XML, for instance, you will find several interpretations of this one's implementation. So dealing with data management is permanently morphing data. So you have to be a morphing expert. And I think that Agentic would be very useful to automate these morphings, because that's where you spend the most of your time. But on the case I just introduced before, to contextualize your question, ensuring data interoperability between the legacy system and this newer enabled solution has indeed been one of the most complex challenges that we've faced. You have seen only a small part of the chain, which is a little bit bigger than this one, but this one was just to illustrate. And to facilitate seamless data integration, we have adopted a combination of open standards, structured formats, and service-based interfaces, as I mentioned them before. We have EAD XML for the standard for preserving archival metadata. We had the JSON, which is a light format in order to exchange information with REST APIs, whereas both REST and SOAP APIs to bridge the system into different generations of architecture and to expose legacy data. Of course, we made that in gradual transition. They were not all existing in the same time, but we also wanted not to disrupt the existing services, because you may have to consume, you may be in a position to consume, but it could be very hard to realign all the system on the same format. It's a question of time, it's a question of resources, and in the end, it's a question of efficiency. And we also had both CSV and PDF standards implemented for document-based exchanges. And even if I agree that maybe PDF is not the right format for open source or document exchange, but in this case, it was to ensure that at least we have one single format by which we have all the documents in one single format and not having to play with several of them, noting that currently we had 4.2 million documents exchanged. So when you decide to morph a document on various types of documents, they may not be all the same. You don't represent the same way in a parliamentary question that you will represent an oral intervention from a member, for instance. So this, all this given, we have chosen PDFA and CSV for document exchange and preservation for the PDF. So the lessons learned we had is that no one size fits all. That's mainly the approach we had, and each integration scenario requires a tailored solution. For instance, the tools and the standard used for integrating a record management system, in our case, the archive management system, are not always suitable for integrating with some AI workflows, even worse when these are real-time AI workflows. In our case, it's not really real-time, but it could be worse if it could be a real-time AI workflows. We have standardization that has to be completed by governance. So it's true that having the right standards is necessary, but not sufficient. We needed to establish data governance policies, versional control practices, common vocabularies to ensure semantic consistency across the systems. And it also goes with the different systems. And in this case, the archive management system was not connecting to the same common vocabulary than the knowledge management system. So we also had to adjust the vocabularies in between the solutions. The reason is that just performed by different entities within the organization with different standards within this legacy system. Legacy systems need mediation layer. Rather than attempting to modernize every legacy system, as I mentioned before, we developed interoperability layers or mediators that could expose structured data to newer systems without rewriting the legacy backend. In the previous case, the JSON structure and format changed while documents were coming from different legislatures. I just mentioned 2004-14, but if you want to have documents after 2014, then you need to go to Open Data Portal, which is another solution that provides similar data, but with a different structure while starting in 2015. AI introduces new needs. So unlike traditional systems, AI workflows often require bulk access to datasets and traceability, and we had to adapt our data pipeline to ensure metadata quality to support our natural language process use case. So we needed to really control all the data from the last system that was injected into the AI one to ensure that we had high quality data. In this case, all this data, all this metadata for the 4.2 million documents were manually controlled by human beings for having this high level quality in the end. So it's not only technology, it's also people. Cross-functional collaboration is key. So the technical success depending on close collaboration between IT experts and archivists in this field. Understanding the structure, the value, and the context of data was really critical for us as a technical side. And ultimately, the shift to interoperable. So AI ready architecture is ongoing journey. It's an ongoing journey. The key is to combine technical interoperability with institutional agility, allowing systems to evolve without losing control over data integrity and traceability. Of course, if you want to have new systems, in this case, you may have an approach which is completely different. So you may have a two-pillar approach and enforcing a reuse before buy, before build at all layers. So reusing data, reusing standard components or reusable components, and reusing client side, so interfaces that you may combine all together, so that you ensure by enforcing reusability, which is part of the European interoperability framework. In this case, you do not duplicate data, but you reuse the same one, avoiding all these issues of transformation and transfer from one solution to another. But that's only for the most recent system, and that's a new principle which is enforced for some years, but not that long.
Thank you, Ludovic. Much appreciated for your thoughts on this question. And if you allow me, I'd like to change a little bit and let Jonathan start answering this time, and then Ludovic, so we can vary in which position you're talking to. Jonathan, my second question is about modularizing these solutions. As you mentioned, many other colleagues mentioned as well, it's advisable, it's highly advisable to modularize from the political, cultural, technological, procurement point of view. I could name a few reasons here, but let's not focus on that. Considering that we all agree about this premise, my question to you is, what architectural strategies do you recommend or have you adopted when you have worked in a parliament to modularize these legacy systems in a way that supports, for example, the gradual integration of new technologies, so you don't have to work in the entire system at once? So how do you ensure that these modular components remain compatible between each other and also with new technologies?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So when we look at sort of the modularization effectively, if we look at even the software which we built, even in the cloud as an example, everything is very modular, and every single component owns its own data still. But the key thing is understanding how it all intercommunicates as an example. So from a architectural perspective, what we have to then do is have a look at obviously each of those sort of data silos from your legacy perspective and understand what are they managing, how are they managing it, what are they actually then doing, and then really about collating a decent strategy in terms of how you can then push that up to your more modern frameworks or your modern sort of integration layers as an example. And I think it's also sort of pointing out that, you know, by leveraging, say, a common API platform as an example, or having this sort of buffer layer, which can then control and redirect, you know, to certain, I'd say, data sources, etc., is actually really quite critical. So a lot of our sort of legacy decisions, again, from the data silo perspectives, was saying, well, actually, you know, this sort of software package is doing its own thing. It doesn't really care about what all these other software packages are actually doing, as an example. So what we now need to do is really bring that up to one common layer from an architectural perspective and say, well, actually, we now have a common platform which is agnostic to where those endpoints are. And that to me is a really critical factor in terms of moving forward as well. So we have done things such as, you know, all our endpoints, as an example, to, you know, as a common endpoint, you know, it doesn't have to map to a specific, you know, like SQL database, or it doesn't have to map to a Cosmos or anything like that. It should be fully interchangeable. So how do we actually design patterns now where we can replace things? And I think this is the key learnings for like going forward. We need to be designing architectural patterns which can be replaced easily. So if we want to move from, let's say you're on AWS and you want to move to Microsoft Azure, how can we actually even remove those sort of dependencies on each other as well? You know, you can obviously leverage certain things, but you need to develop and you need to have your architecture set up in a way where you can quite freely not be, you know, sort of conjoined to one particular technology or one particular way of doing things. So how can you abstract things to a certain level to make it reusable across the stack without having to, you know, be locked into a particular, you know, cloud vendor for the next 10 years, because you're effectively replicating the same problem, right? Just in a cloud environment in some respects. So you should be able to take out an old AI model, put a new one in, which is more advanced, and still get the same sort of benefits, if that makes sense, without having to redevelop everything from scratch. So to me, the gradual integration sort of new technologies really becomes a sort of foundational layer of saying, well, actually, how can we set ourselves up so we can start to replace things? Because a lot of the, you know, sort of previous questions, which we've sort of gone through as well, is like, we don't want to reintroduce technical debt. We don't want to allow that process to basically stop us innovating again in 5 years' time, right? Because people will get comfortable with the current technology, and the growth period which we're going through with AI and cloud technology and a range of other things means that we have to rethink our old architecture models and rethink how we can actually position ourselves into that new way of thinking where things are modular. We can just take something out, replace it with something different without breaking everything. You know, those are the key learnings that I'd like to sort of, you know, sort of stress in terms of when other parliaments are actually thinking about architecture. It's rethinking that whole mindset around old versus new.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your comments on this. Ludovic, would you like to comment on this topic as well?
Yeah, with pleasure. Just to extend what Jonathan was mentioning, what basically you say is being under control in terms of compliance. My interpretation. Why being under control is this question of managing the technological debt. So your technological debt is something that you will have anyway because you're introducing a technology. So at one time, it will have a debt. But the thing you have to be under control is the size of the debt. The bigger the size of the debt is, of course, the more complex it will be for you to be in a position to evolve your organization and to be in capacity to evolve. And the second one is about compliance. When we are talking about reusing data, we are talking about interoperability. And in the European Union, we have the European Interoperability Framework, which is equivalent to regulation. So this is something that we have to consider. So when we have data, we have to make them fair. When we have data, we have to ensure that we try to avoid to reproduce this one, but to reuse, then copying the data. That's valid for data, but that's also valid for the solution or the component layer, which is also valid for the user interface layer or the solution layer. So in these cases, it's really keeping control and compliance. Compliance, we are talking about this one for data through interoperability framework, but we can also extend to the GDPR, or in the case of the institutions, the EU DPR, which is a similar approach for data protection, but also the one for the AI Act, which is applicable to everybody. So you have to ensure that you are compliant with the regulation that you have. And within this context of being compliant, it will drive you to implement what you just mentioned by being under control of your debt, by having rationalization and implementing a dual pillar approach in favor of interoperability. So that's my reaction to what Jonathan mentioned, because we very often forget compliance. It's easy to build something, but in which context do you build something? And you have to be aware of the context that you are buying this thing. And at the European Parliament, the evolution of our digital landscape is guided by the need to balance continuity of critical legacy systems with the gradual and secure integration of emerging technologies that includes artificial intelligence. And we have adopted a modular layered architecture strategy and call into a corporate architecture framework. And this point allows us to progressively decouple functionalities from older systems that are using service-oriented design, such as API mediation layers, for instance, and where feasible, with feasible microservices in this case of this mediation layers. And these approaches help us to create reusable components that can be extended or replaced without disrupting essential parliamentary operations such as legislative workflows or multilingual content management. And our approach focuses not only on technology, but also on business capabilities. And we use capability-based planning to ensure that the new components, especially those related to AI or advanced analytics, are aligned with Parliament's institutional priorities, such as legislative support or the administrative efficiency. And this ensures that, in the same time, innovation serves or democratic mandate. So interoperability is a cornerstone in this context. And as I mentioned, within the EU ecosystem, the Parliament aligns with its digital architecture with the EU interoperability framework and standards, and mainly the one that were introduced by the European Commission. And this is also for us an essential point to have an internal cohesion, but also a trusted data flow.
Thank you so much, Ludovic. Esteban, would you like to share your thoughts on what Jonathan and Ludovic just said, and also about the question?
Yes, just a little comment. I agree with Jonathan and Ludovic. The infrastructure of the system is very essential to replace to do some replace on for integrated new technology. That's why I mentioned in the first intervention that it's very important to define, when you develop a IT system, define a correct infrastructure in correct layer of the system, because if you don't do at the first initial, when you start the project, it's very difficult to change after that. It's very difficult to integrate a monolithic system that doesn't have a modular approach. So just agree with Jonathan and Ludovic.
Thank you so much, Esteban, for your comments as well. Well, we are reaching the final question of that I have prepared, and later on I will include some of the questions that were added here in the chat. But I will start with you, Ludovic, this time. From the efficiency standpoint, how does the EU Parliament determine when a particular legacy system have reached a tipping point where you can no longer continue with it, and that making the further maintenance becomes unsustainable, especially considering the potential gains offered by emerging technologies such as generative AI? And also, could you share your thoughts guiding this particular decision in your case that can serve as an example for colleagues facing a similar dilemma? Ludovic, would you like to start with this one?
Thank you. I will just share one very simple diagram, and I will explain it in this context because it also contains the elements related to artificial intelligence, and that's what we call the EP technological clock. And it was introduced 12 years ago, I would say, by someone called Todor Todorov in the European Parliament, and I have to give him credit for this activity because he really built it by himself with the support of the colleagues, of course, but he was the main driver in that. And the EP technological clock is a representation of the IT technological standards for the year for which the document is approved, such as what we call the clock year. And in the European Parliament technological clock, the usability of technologies is classified into 4 groups. We have the emerging one, we have the mainstream, the replaced, and the obsolete. And every group is further subdivided into 3 levels of usability, each of which define constraints. And in this matter, the usability of a technology is based on the 12 hours forming the technological clock. And this approach gives a holistic view of technology platforms, standards, protocols to be used with the IT landscape, whether infrastructure, software, hardware, communication protocols, and others. So it enables the application responsible and project managers to evaluate the technology that they apply and to identify the connections with the others. And it will lead to a unified IT investment approach. So this process is run on a yearly basis to indicate the latest technology changes. And the EP Technology Clock enables a continuous obsolescence management plan for all IT solutions and infrastructure within the European Parliament, thus ensuring that there will not be a need for a big IT obsolescence management program, which is the conclusion that you arrive when you have a huge debt. When your technological debt is so huge, you need to set up a specific program to address this one. And in this case, very often it's extremely painful to arrive at this level because you will have to use a lot of your investment in order to support the management of obsolescence. That should be a continuous base and not something that you are doing on a one shot because you have a major issue in one or several domains. And in this case, the procedure for the introduction of new technologies and the retirement of obsolete technologies is defined by the Architectural Standard Board. And emerging technologies shall pass all the steps to become a mainstream standard. Then, once a technology is replaced by another recent standard one, it follows a divestment process, ensuring that its complete removal from the European Parliament's IT landscape. Of course, time may not be of the same value for all the technologies. You have some components, for instance, or components for user interface, that could enter very rapidly at the hour of innovation, but that will go through the clock maybe of 6 hours in 1 year, because the technology is evolving extremely rapidly. When you are taking large language models, you may have 1 or 2 versions per year, meaning that you will inject within the clock at the hour of innovation or the hour of definition 1 version. Within the year, you have a second version that comes, but still your one, the first version, is maybe at the hour of mass adoption, while the new one is already arriving at the hour of innovation of definition. So in this case, you can see that if you have big softwares that you acquire from an external provider, you may have a time which is largely slower, moving from 1 year to another one that took maybe more than 1 year, where you may have some components inside which are going faster and could go through several years within one year. So just to illustrate it with what we had before in our example, you can see that in the obsolete standards, of course, for the one who are making technology, you recognize that SOAP web services are not really the latest out of technology for interoperability and web services. Also, some Java component 8.11 that we add inside, but this one are obsolete and needs to be replaced. While at the same time, we have some mainstream standards. REST API is something which is completely mainstream right now, or Oracle 19 or Java 17 for the morphing component. And then we also have some emerging standards that we integrated inside S3 and added at the level of Archibot in order to ease the search of the elements. But this is really the process that we have set up and we implemented in order to ensure that we really have a control of all the technologies that we have inside. And it's a huge activity. It's not something that you start aside by 1 or 2 people and saying that I will build such a landscape for all my organization. It's much more used than that. You may discuss about protocols such as SOAP or such as REST, for instance, or Widversion, JSON, or other ones. You may have to discuss about the nature of the servers, the nature of network components. So it's really something which is covering the overall IT landscape. But having such an approach at least guarantees that on a yearly basis, you will verify the maturity of your technology. And then when you arrive at the hour 7, which is the hour of declining standards, you can already initiate a proactive activity to know what you will do with your replacement. And you will use your replacement depending on the business strategy and the technological strategy, which is attached to this component. If you say that this technology has to be removed because it will be replaced by a completely different one, in this case, you do not rewrite with a more recent version or more recent technology. You decommission the technology, but you decommission the information system and you replace by another one. So it's linked to another process, which is called reuse before buy, before build, in which you will identify the opportunity of the divestment and the obsolescence of a component of one item, which is registered inside your clock. A last example to illustrate, if you want to buy a collection of servers, but you have a tiered cloud storage approach within your organization, and you want to change the servers from your DMZ, which is the zone that you expose to the civil society and your outside world, and you have a cloud strategy approach that says that everything that should be public could go on public cloud. In this case, what is the reasoning behind to buy these servers to replace the obsolete one in your DMZ rather than moving this infrastructure with containers on the cloud, on the public cloud, so that you may support your strategy? And again, as was mentioned by Jonathan before, this containerization approach helps you to be independent and not to be locked in with a vendor, because you can move your containers, such as Kubernetes, for instance, from one place to another one, or from one provider to another one using a PaaS approach.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ludovic, for sharing this with us. It's very interesting. I saved on my email this clock as well. I can share with colleagues. I was fascinated to see this structure. I never saw that before, so much appreciated for sharing that. Esteban, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Yes, I said a different approach to analyze the decision to replace or change some legacy system. Obviously, there is a technical approach that the technical know very well. So there is a obsolescence, maintain cost, and also expertise, experience of the professional, because sometimes we don't have the professional with expertise to maintain some old system because they're old technology. Always asking for the new developer node to new technology, so sometimes they forgot the old technology. Is very often, but when here in the Chamber of Deputies, when the system is so deeply embedded in the parliamentary workflow, that the decision for replace the legacy system is not technical decision, it's a strategic one, because the user, they see working system, they don't understand why we need to replace them for a new version with a new technology. They saw all they see as all they saw as the system is work, and there is a lemma: if work, why change it? So there's no technical decision. So when we try to convince the decision maker to change the system, we show them the security reasons of change the legacy system. So this is the tipping point for us to show them, if we maintain a legacy system, there's a lot of security risk that we can lose data, we can lose the system if we continue using. So we try to show the decision maker more security approach for replace legacy system.
Thank you so much, Esteban, for your comments. To close this round, Jonathan, would you like to share your thoughts on this, on the same question, and of course on what the colleagues just shared?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, security is definitely an interesting one. I think I'd definitely want to advocate for that as well. I said, like, if anybody is out there using the SharePoint on-premise system, by the way, make sure you patch it. So that's it. There's a big security thing around that one at the moment. So just with SharePoint on-prem. So just put that one out there. But what we usually find is like, and I'll sort of just be brief around this because again, been great conversations by Ludovic and Esteban as well. So we usually find two main drivers. One is a technical driver and one is a business driver. So the technical side of it is they'll have this old system. They hired a range of developers and they've retired, they've moved on, and a range of other things, and nobody knows how it works. You know, you might walk into their server racks and there's a big sticker on it saying, do not reboot this, do not touch, do not do anything. We have no idea how to recover this if you know, it goes off. So, you know, that's literally some you know, parliaments could actually leave it to the nth degree before having to be forced to make a decision around that. The other one is an interesting one, which I'm finding a lot more, you know, and it's probably in some respects due to these types of conversations as well, is like the fear of missing out. So from a business perspective, you know, we might find that, you know, one person worked in this parliament and they had this really cool AI tool, and then they've moved to another parliament who's still stuck in the past. And so they're sort of going, well, why do we have to work like this? And you know what I mean? So it's a business driver to say there are better ways of doing things and I've experienced it. So there's some interesting sort of drivers in terms of, I think sometimes it's understanding what's possible. Having a practical application behind it is really, really helpful to drive that sort of, you know, movement around, well, actually, we should look at replacing this. And we're seeing like, you know, high levels or high up people within parliaments, you know, really getting their hands dirty with AI because they're hearing from other jurisdictions what they're trying to do with it. And they go, well, actually, I don't want to miss out. I want to make sure that, you know, we're progressing as well. And so a lot of it we're finding is that sort of word of mouth, the driving to understand what's possible and to know that they're not the first ones doing it, I think is another really key thing. So it minimizes their risk and a range of other things. So to me, I look at it, you know, being that sort of major sort of technical issue, but also the what we call the fear of missing out as well.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your comments. Colleagues, we're reaching at the end of our panel, and I saw the right honorable gentleman here sent a few questions. It's not possible to answer all of them, but if you agree, I'd like to propose we answer one of them, replacing your final remarks. So, there is one which I found very interesting, which is the first one. Considering all that we have discussed here today, your expertise, what kind of governance is needed for what he called data-driven digitalization, and for this to work for all parliaments, not just a selected few? If you can make that in 1 minute, more or less, and as your final considerations. I know I'm being brutally absurd with the 1 minute, but we are almost at the end. So, Ludovic, would you like to try this challenge to answer in 1 minute the question of the right honorable gentleman here?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, unfortunately, in 1 minute is extremely hard because the data layer is the most complex one you have to address into enterprise architecture. Right? Even if the most simplest layer that you have with the business layer, the application layer, the infrastructure layer, and the data layer, even with this very simple view, everybody has always considered that the data are an integrative part of the information system. One information system. I develop one information system. These are my data, and I do not share it with anybody else because they're under my responsibility, which is against having a global approach to the organization. So data is the worst layer in enterprise architecture. So yes, the recommendation is definitely to have a data strategy and to have a data governance inside your own organization that will ensure that you place the right level of responsibility for the right data, and that you will ensure the reusability of these data and avoid to copy them. And this is also part of the architecture standard boards to be implemented to ensure that you apply this one. But data governance is key in that. the most complex ones to set up.
Thank you so much, Ludovic. Jonathan, would you like to try as well?
It's probably not much else to add from Ludovic's perspective, but it's one of those sort of really interesting things that I think it's also leading by example is really important, by all of it. So, it's sort of trying to go away from that mentality of saying like, my data is just my problem. And I think it's moving also to that sort of paradigm shift in terms of how can we actually make this data more publicly accessible as well, because if we make the data publicly accessible in meaningful ways and meaningful formats, I think that can flow across borders, that can flow across, these sort of other areas to really, I think, create that global community. But if people are hesitant in terms of sharing public data, not your private internal data, etc., in a meaningful and open way, we're never going to sort of move forward, as a global sort of, conglomerate, as an example.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Esteban, would you like to share your thoughts and close?
Just a little comment. So one of the good advice is obviously, but not use, but you have to have a data governance, because it's not obviously, because a small parliament like us, to start to develop a IT system, they forget the good data governance, and the problem start to arising when they try to integrate with new technology or older technology. So if you don't have a good data governance, the problem will be a pain for you. So you have to define different roles, access role, different format, but you have to define a very good data governance.